Hey, I'm Zac.
And I'm Jesse.
And you're watching In Depth
on Now You Know.
This episode of In Depth is sponsored by our friends at Nouveau Monde Graphite Mine.
Faut que je souris.
Action.
We want to partner up with the EV industry to supply our kick-ass graphite to you guys so you can continue the electric revolution.
And we're sponsored by Climate Exchange. This is your last chance, really, to get in on the Tesla raffle. These are $250 raffle tickets. There's only 4,000 of them sold, so you have a really good chance of winning.
And I can win a Tesla?
A Model X fully loaded, Model S fully loaded, or a Model 3 Performance fully loaded, and they'll pay the taxes on the winning, so you won't have to pay a penny, and you'll get that amazing car of your choice.
So completely free car if you win. And if you don't win?
This is still a good cause. This is going towards Climate Exchange's work in getting carbon pricing policies enacted. All right, so we're talking about something kind of fun today.
Talking about the Tesla stock. Now, before we get started, we are not financial advisors. Let's put the screen up there. Yeah, yada, yada. Don't listen to us.
Right.
We're just two guys on YouTube. If you listen to us, that's your own fault because there's plenty of crazy stuff on YouTube. But let's talk about what happened this week.
Yeah, so let's take a look at the chart here. And as you can see, basically Tesla has been trading in this band between about 200 and sub 400 for about a year.
Right.
And during that time, whenever the FUDsters, had a good little story they could pull out, the stock would dip and sometimes even dip below 200, and everyone got really scared. It just was kind of trailing there for about a year. And then just recently, we got this. So about January 10th, Tesla stock price busted above 500 for the first time ever, and that started getting a lot more attention and excitement. I am guessing also because it's a psychological number. 500 is just this, it's just a number, right? But a lot of people, it's like, whoa, it's never been at 500 before.
Right. And I mean, it really, at the start of this year is when we started to see an upward trend for Tesla's stock. And that was mostly on the heels of the Gigafactory in Shanghai being built and Model 3s coming out of the factory. You have dancing Elon, which definitely helped the stock. And then with the Q4 earnings call and the earnings letter, which showed Q4 being profitable. So we saw, 2 quarters of profitability. They're really dominating the electric market, especially in new markets like Europe and China. They're starting to come out ahead in many different countries and just sort of exploding onto the roads as well. I mean, there's just been such a increase in the number of Teslas on the road in many different places. I mean, the US always kind of had this growing base level of Teslas, but in Europe, there was just an absolute Model 3 explosion because every time a ship came to port full of Model 3s, those Model 3s just proliferated across Europe, and boom, you're just like the next day, you're just like, are there more Model 3s going around? So all of this kind of led to this positive sentiment towards Tesla, and the stock price grew and grew and grew.
And then looking to late January or earlier this month, we see that they busted out beyond 600, and then things started to really get exciting. Where you remember the other day we're in the Austin airport, we're checking our phones, and Tesla stock price hits $950.
Which was insane. So this bust out that we saw recently, really, really exciting. I wish that someone had, thought of this, had kind of predicted that this would happen.
I've been watching a couple guys on YouTube that back in May of 2019 kind of predicted this. Check this out. So what we're talking about on In Depth this week is the FUDs Window.
What? What is what?
All right, so I've been investing in the stock market since 1983, since I was a teenager. Mm-hmm. And I've watched the patterns of like hundreds of stocks daily since then. So I think I'm pretty good at recognizing pattern. What you begin to see when you zoom out and you get a perspective on stocks, surprise, surprise, is that stocks go up and they go down, but they do it in patterns usually. They turn through an up and down cycle. They usually break out either to the upside or the downside of that pattern. And as Kathy Wood from ARK Invest has said, the longer that churn, usually the bigger the breakout, either to the upside or the downside.
Okay.
I thought I'd make it a little easier to see here. So this is a chart of Tesla from about 2010 on. And you can see that there's 3 basic patterns here that once you draw the lines, it looks pretty apparent. Now, without the lines, it can be kind of like, what are you talking about?
A little challenging to pinpoint, but I see them here, yeah.
Yeah, drew in the lines just to make it easier. So that first pattern was a very small band of up and down, and it happened from 2010 till about 2013, and then it busted out to the upside. Then it started the second pattern, which is even a bigger range. You can see quite a bit of churn, and that's unusual. And that's what we see in Tesla, right? Because you've got so much, so many of us that are like, it's gonna be big, and you got so many short sellers who are like, it sucks. So it's been quite a big churn, but basically it hits a top, goes back down to a bottom, hits a top, and then that busted out, and that was in end of 2016, early 2017, busted out into a new pattern that lasted a couple of years. Then just recently we've seen it break to the downside. So here's where the FUDster window comes in. This is their window of opportunity, right? FUDsters wait, as we've seen before, for something bad to take place with Tesla, and some window where they think there won't be much good news coming. Remember, Q1, we had kind of a bad earnings report about, we weren't profitable.
Right.
Elon said we were going to be profitable the year before, and then he's like, but we weren't. So Fudster's like, awesome.
Perfect.
We'll start with this. Also, he's out of good news, right? He's done with his autonomy day. He's done talking about the Model Y. He's probably going to have another quarter, Q2, of losses.
Yep.
Awesome. That'll be some more bad news that we can pile on with. And there probably won't be any great news until maybe Q3, Q4 of 2019. That's when car sales generally do really well, right? It's Q4. So good. We're going to have like months and months. We can come up with all sorts of bad stories about Tesla, and he won't be able to really counter with any positive stories of his own. So if we can do that long enough, we can just wear everybody down, right? And they'll finally be like, oh my God, the stock is just doing poorly. I'm going to sell all my stock.
But I mean, this isn't how the stock market, it's not what it's for. It's not about just like, we're going to tell you a bunch of things about this company until you buy or sell it. It should be like, oh, that company is doing well. Oh, I think that this company has a good long-term vision. Therefore, I'll buy. And then hopefully in the future, when things go well, either they're going to start paying a dividend or they're going to, just do very well, and everyone is going to want a share in this company. And then the value of the share goes up and then you sell it. Right.
Tesla is a different kind of company here. We've been telling you this on the show. We're going up against big oil and big auto. These are multi-billion-dollar companies, trillion-dollar markets. And along comes Tesla. And if Tesla does well, it's going to disrupt. It's going to do such a big harm to them. So they would love to squash it. If you can get the stock price low enough, you can actually squash a company, right? Because then they can't go and get more financing and more money.
Right. Which Tesla just did.
Luckily, they just did.
Yeah, smart to do it.
I wasn't so big on the idea in the beginning because I was like, why would the stock even dip below 200? But it did, so great. They've got another $2.7 billion on hand. But I want to remind everyone, we've seen this story so many times before with Tesla, and they've always come out a winner. Now, we can't promise that will happen again, but I think it looks just like the last few times. I think we are going to come out a winner. But remember before, there were some pretty big fuddy things before. Model 3 production. Tesla can't even make the Model 3.
They can't make it. It's just impossible. Now they're making practically almost 1,000 a day.
Right. Or how about this one? This one seemed impossible to get past. The SEC is going to get Elon fired out of the company.
Exactly. And now basically just Elon needs to have someone at Tesla read his tweets
that he
before he tweets them. But he hires that person.
Right. So what I guess we'd like to prepare you for here, since we're looking at this from the Fudster's perspective, is that they've got probably another 6 months of opportunity here in their window where they can really just keep piling on. So I'm going to predict that probably around Q1 of 2020 would be the time when some good news will start coming out about profitability. And that's really something you can't play around with that much.
You can't hide too much about the profitability?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to come up with fear and uncertainty when a company's just making money. There'll be so much good news coming out of Tesla then. I mean, Shanghai Gigafactory should be fully operational then.
True. So you're saying Q1 of next year, because they'll hopefully have 2 quarters of profitability, both Q3 and Q4 of this year.
Right.
And so then it's kind of like, as long as they're showing strong profits there, it's kind of undeniable that they're going to be continuing with that.
Right.
Okay.
Because let's not forget, a lot of the FUD we're getting now is just based on this self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh, the stock is down. That's become its own story.
Right.
Oh, the stock is down. And you can't run that story forever.
Wow. Q1 of 2020, we were expecting to see a breakout.
Yeah.
And that was back in May of 2019. If you don't believe us,
can I just give us a little pat on the back? I mean, I
Yeah.
think it's time for a little victory lap here for all of us in Tesla Nation, because we've been kind of holding our breath. At least I feel like I have for the past few years, as you know, something good would happen and then a huge FUD story would crush it down, and you'd be like, ah. So now we've hit this point where I feel like we've busted out, and here's kind of why I feel that way. We've had some pretty big players who had been Tesla bears flip.
Yeah, absolutely. Jim Cramer is an excellent example of this. He kind of flipped just around the same time that BlackRock flipped. BlackRock obviously being that really big fund manager that said that they are not going to support fossil fuel industry anymore.
And by big, we mean trillions of dollars.
The biggest.
Right.
The biggest, right? And so that, I think, has a really big impact on the market, because they're looking at some of the biggest players and saying, oh, wow, this is serious. We're not just, talking about, a couple of hippies, who care about the environment. It's now the largest fund manager in the world.
And I just want to mention a little player here, Greta Thunberg, just a girl in Sweden. A year ago, most of us didn't know who she was. And she has catalyzed this movement, which I think kind of led to some things happening. I mean, we talked about Davos, Switzerland, and the World Economic Forum, and who knows what really took place behind the scenes there, but it does seem like a lot of things shifted right around that event.
It's just all been bubbling up to a head, and I think it's finally popped. I think that for the longest time, the mainstream media was able to kind of keep Tesla under their thumb. They were able to, anytime Tesla had any good news, the FUD was able to come in and come up with some kind of bad news, whether it was true or untrue or speculation, or just every little good news story was sandwiched in with a bunch of bad news stories. And so most people who are watching TV, who are, interested in stocks, but not necessarily interested in Tesla, they would just be seeing, oh, Tesla is starting to build a gigafactory in China. Oh, but there's so many other problems with Tesla. Never mind. Let me move on to something else, right? Oh, Tesla is dominating their market. Oh, but we don't know. There's some other problems, and we don't even think about it.
Well, dominating their market, but EVs are such a tiny piece
right,
of
and
the
so
market.
Blah, blah, blah. Right. It's just been tamped down, tamped down, tamped down. And what I think has been happening is this tamping down has actually just been this loading of this cannon. They're just getting it all ready to explode here. And so for the first time, we're seeing like actual good news stories that are pretty irrefutable in terms of delivery numbers and market share and the China Gigafactory, all kind of converging in at the same time. And then profitability Q4, excellent growth in that quarter as well. And all of this kind of bubbles all this good news to the top. And I think what it did is it got a lot of people who normally just kind of dismissed Tesla because they heard all the FUD at the same time. They went, oh my gosh, all this good news bubbling to the top, I better look into the company. And they dig and they look under the hood and they, the frunk, and they're like, oh, wow, it's not an engine. This is a completely different company than I thought it was. And then they did their research and they went, wow, time to invest.
Yeah, and there's a couple players here. We mentioned Jim Cramer. He has a lot of people watching him every week. And all of a sudden you have him flip. Why did he flip? We don't know for sure. We know that his wife got a Model X. We know that, that has a big deal, right? Butts and seats. But who knows? All we know is that on the air, he starts talking about Tesla being an investment and that oil companies should be out of your portfolio and that you've got to make this shift, right? So that's huge because a lot of people follow him. A lot of people even at CNBC follow him. So even the talking heads there started talking differently.
Right.
But then we also saw a little 1-minute clip with President Trump where he started calling Elon Musk a national treasure that we had to protect. I can't tell you what an effect that probably had on a lot of people who were Tesla bears, who were like, oh, well, if the president says that this is someone to cherish, I should look into this.
Right.
Then, once the stock starts busting out of 500, 600, you have a lot of fund managers in the world who are now saying, hey, is Tesla in our fund? Do we own any shares?
And if they aren't saying that, there's people calling up going, hello, why aren't you buying Tesla? I heard it's doing amazing.
So they start telling their brokers, start filling up on Tesla shares. That feeds into this feeding frenzy that we just saw the other day, which is why I think it busted up to 950. Now, you might be asking now, as of today, well, we're not at 950 today. Oh no, is that the end? Because we've dropped a couple hundred points. That's fine. That's how stocks work. They get a little overexcited going down sometimes, a little overexcited going up sometimes. What we would like to see going forward in the next few months, probably I would like to see it for about a year, is a nice churn, just up and down little movements around 700.
Right.
To me, that would mean that we're being a little bit more realistic. It means that all these fund managers are trying to buy it probably around that price point. And so whenever it dips to that, they buy it and it scoots back up again. If it can just churn around that for a while, that's a nice movement to see on a stock. That means that everything is doing great.
Right.
And we've been saying it all along. Let's cut back to our clip here from May of 2019, where we pretty much laid it out for you. So according to John Murphy of Bank of America, as of May 21st, 31% of Tesla shares are now being shorted. He said, in our view, this could set up for a short squeeze in the coming days, weeks, months, should deliveries, profit losses, cash flow burn come in even slightly better than draconian expectations, or should Musk introduce another business venture and or longer-term financial target that once again gets bulls excited.
Okay, so 31% shorted stock.
Yeah.
This means that 31% of the stock needs to be bought.
Yes. At some point.
At some point, and that's dependent on brokerage houses. And
That's dependent on how long your short was for. You know, when you bought it.
and when you have to sell it.
Yeah, so the short squeeze is going to happen when all these people who have shorted the stock, the 31% of the stock that's been already sold, have to go buy back the shares, because you only have a certain amount of time in your contract before you have to buy it back. So for instance, they might have already sold your shares, like you own some shares of Tesla. Someone might have come along and sold your shares. They're going to have to buy them back to put back into your account.
And they've been shorting it all the way down.
So I mean, I completely understand shorting a stock. If a company has a company stock has gotten so high, and you think like, well, everyone's just lost sight of reality here. This is way overpriced. I'm going to sell it now, short it, wait till it drops, buy it back low. But
Right, that's the whole point.
That's the whole point. But here we're seeing that, in my opinion, Tesla stock is already way too cheap. Why would you start shorting it now? You really think it's going to go under?
I think that that's the hope. I think that's the hope of the oil industry. They do not want to see all of these wonderful little profit centers driving around turn into not profit centers for them. Big auto, the same way. I mean, you look at any car driving on the road that has a gas tank, and it's a little profit center for them.
Right.
Tons of little things break. Even though they already sold it, maybe at a loss, they know that they're going to make the money back in selling you a transmission and an exhaust system, because they have that one pipe and that costs, $400. And so when you go to the place and they're like, gee, that's going to be a $400 fix. And you're like, really? All right. Aluminum tape it is, like that is exactly who is going to lose if Tesla does well.
But here's the thing. Those shorts, like we said, have to buy the stock back, and they have to do it fairly soon. So there's going to be what's typically called a short squeeze, which means that all those people that don't want to be buying the stock are going to be forced to buy it, and that's going to drive the price up. And as the price goes up, more and more people are going to have to get in there quick before the price gets too high and buy it again. And buy it again, and it just starts a really quick rise, and that could very conceivably happen. So I know coming back from this, you might be saying to yourself, okay, Zac and Jesse, what should I do? If I have the stock, should I sell it now? Because I've made a lot of money. If I don't have it, should I buy it now? And again, we're not financial advisors. It all depends on what you're doing in your life. A lot of people are investors. That means that they invest in something and they're going to hold it for a while. That's kind of what Jesse and I are.
Right.
You might be a trader. Traders are people who buy and sell to make money as it goes up or down. If you're a trader, then you already know what to do.
Right.
If you're not a trader, my suggestion would be don't become a trader on this stock.
Don't do it overnight. There's a lot of learning that needs to go into it. Our suggestion, although you shouldn't take that as financial advice, is to not get into day trading, right now, just because there's big movements on the Tesla stock.
It looks so easy in hindsight to say, oh, but if I had just sold at 900 and then bought back at 700, I would have made a lot of money. Yes, in hindsight, if we could all do that, we'd all be rich. It's not so easy when you sell at 900, it goes to 950, you freak out and buy it again,
right?
And then it drops. So you've got to check your emotions. The easiest way to check your emotions, to be honest, is to hold it for a long time. Right. Now, then you might be asking, well, I'm not really in Tesla stock right now, or I don't have that many shares, but I'd like to. What should I do? I don't know. It's hard to say. I think we're at the beginning of what we saw with Amazon or Apple, where in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, the stock is going to be nowhere near where it is today.
Right.
But it's hard to say, like, should you get in at 800? Should you get in at 600? I would wait till things start to churn at a reasonable level, and then,
and then buy on the low days. Wait for some FUD story to come out where it's like, oh no, Tesla this or that, and everyone dumps their stock, and oh my gosh, it plummeted down to $600 a share. Oh no. But do you see the crazy thing here is that we're talking about 600 being like a low number. It was not the case before. It was like if we hit 400, it was going to be like, wow, 400. And then 420, as Elon put it, that was where they were going to take the stock private.
How many people thought he was, how many people publicly said he was a nut to say that he could get the company funded for 420? And how reasonable does that look now?
Right. This is kind of what we've been talking about this whole time, is that Elon isn't as crazy as everyone makes him out to be. He has this vision, which is amazing. It is baffling to anyone who isn't completely on board with it.
It's such fast innovation that I think most people who follow stocks, most analysts, can't put it in the right perspective. They watch stocks that don't have much innovation. These companies aren't innovating. Along comes Elon with plans that sound just crazy about autonomy and the price of batteries dropping and new battery technology, and they're like, what? And this stock price means that there's some new opportunities that Tesla can get involved in, one of which is what Elon just tweeted about the other day, which is Giga Texas. Now, that was just a little poll on Twitter. Who knows what he meant by it? I think he meant, hey, we can easily get funding now if we want to build another Gigafactory. Do you want it in Texas?
Right.
Center of the country.
It's a pretty darn good place for it. Many places in the United States would be perfect for a Gigafactory.
But I don't think it's a coincidence that was tweeted out right after the stock busted out like this, because that changes everything. Banks are totally willing to do any kind of financing for a company that's worth this much.
Right. And also having Tesla top out at 950 means that when we're sitting at 700, going above 700 is not going to seem so crazy.
Right. Because keep in mind, ARK Invest has put a bullish case on Tesla at $7,000 a share.
Right. Because they're actually, and they are actually looking forward and planning it out in terms of like, okay, so if autonomy happens and if all of this stuff happens, the bull case is $7,000 a share, which is 10 times what it's currently hovering around.
Right.
That should be an indicator of where the growth could go.
Right.
Now, this is a 5-year price target.
Right.
So obviously it's not going to happen next month or next quarter. It's going to be some time, and that's why we're Tesla investors. That's why when the stock peaks at 950 and it goes down to 700 and you're just like, whoa, that was a huge opportunity wave that just passed. And you're like, should I have sold and then bought and then sold and then bought? If you're just a regular old investor, who in my case bought way back at like 250, I'm going 700, 900. I don't care. This is great growth.
Exactly.
And, the next time the stock takes a dip after we stabilize, pick up some more shares. I feel stupid that I didn't sell my liver to go buy more shares back when the price was below 200.
Yeah, I think the only thing you could do now is work on a time machine and go back in time and buy some more shares. But, again, I think we should take a little victory lap here. Here's one more clip from what we said back in May when a lot of comments said, you're crazy.
Right.
So what I guess we'd like to prepare you for here, since we're looking at this from the Fudsters' perspective, is that they've got probably another 6 months of opportunity here in their window where they can really just keep piling on. So I'm going to predict that probably around Q1 of 2020 would be the time when some good news will start coming out about profitability. And that's really something you can't play around with that much.
Can't hide too much about the profitability?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to come up with fear and uncertainty when a company's just making money. There'll be so much good news coming out of Tesla then. Shanghai Gigafactory should be fully operational then.
True. So you're saying Q1 of next year, because they'll hopefully have 2 quarters of profitability, both Q3 and Q4 of this year.
Right.
And so then it's kind of like, as long as they're showing strong profits there, it's kind of undeniable that they're going to be continuing with that.
Right.
Okay.
Because let's not forget, a lot of the FUD we're getting now is just based on this self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh, the stock is down. That's become its own story.
Right.
Oh, the stock is down. And you can't run that story forever. That's what's happening now. It's just that nobody can see it except for a few people. You guys can see it.
Right.
And that should give you some hope that we know what we're talking about. These things do repeat themselves.
Right.
And I want to mention just one thing that we haven't mentioned during this episode, which is actually probably one of the biggest things that's going to cause this short squeeze, but we're not even counting it in the equation on purpose.
What?
Robotaxis.
Oh, yeah.
I'm discounting it here because, so many people are like, oh, it'll never happen. Okay, great. It'll never happen.
Yeah, okay.
Great.
But imagine if it does happen on top of all the other stuff that's happening right here.
But I'm just saying, I think the short squeeze can happen and the stock price can go through the roof without even robotaxi taking place.
Cars that you
it will
still
take
have
place,
to mostly drive yourself.
Right.
Not mostly. I don't mostly drive my car.
Right, 99% of the time it
me.
drives you. Exactly. No, and I do think robotaxi is going to take place, but I'm just saying when you're trying to figure out, like, is it worth holding on to that Tesla stock? I would. We pretty much said in Q1 we thought Tesla stock was going to bust out of a 1 year long plateau.
Right.
Is what it did.
Right.
And why does that seem so obvious from where we were standing, or now in hindsight? It's because the narrative that most people heard that don't follow Tesla closely, that aren't in Tesla Nation, was all of this FUD, which was just
it was
false.
wrong. It was all wrong. And the whole time we were just looking at each new iron that Tesla was adding to the fire and just being like, whoa, this Gigafactory thing. It seems like they're building it pretty fast. It might be done by the end of the year. And hey, what do you know? It was. Because in China, they build things fast. That is so much a part of it, is taking a look at Tesla really in depth.
Hey, that's the name of the show.
And that's what we try and do on this channel all the time. That's what we've been doing for the past 3 years. We live and breathe it. So we have just been in this fight for the longest time. It's so nice. I know that so many of you are out there who bought way back when, and you were just like sitting there with a headache the whole time, just like, man, this sucks. But here's to show that it works. It shows that it pays off if you trust your analysis.
Right.
And thank you so much for watching. Now you know.